Hi, Hans Finzel. I'm a leadership guy. I love all things leadership. I'm a successful author. I've written 10 books in the field of leadership. But the thing I love most about leaders is helping them take their leadership to the next level. There's a lot of things you probably don't know about leadership, even though you think you do. I'm excited to be on Dov Baron's podcast, and we are discussing a couple of interesting topics. Terminal niceness in leadership and how it can actually destroy your leadership, and caring enough to confront. Leaders that don't confront are in for going into dangerous places. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, profit in your business, your life, and of course, in your leadership. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips as part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to be taking an insider look at why being nice is so destructive in leadership. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And of course, we're extremely grateful to Inc.com for making us the #1 podcast for you to listen to be a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. We really appreciate it. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, a leader in any capacity whatsoever, you know that leadership can be hard. And that you, as the leader, you're going to have to make some decisions that most people just don't want to make. And unless you're a full-blown sociopath, sometimes that's not so easy. But what if being nice will actually destroy your business? So the question is there a way to be a great leader without being either a dishcloth or a sociopath? And the answer, of course, is yes. And if you want to find out about that, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going. Our guest today on this episode is Hans Finzel. Hans Finzel. Dr. Hans Finzel is a successful author, speaker, trusted authority in the field of leadership. For more than 20 years, he served as the president of an international nonprofit, which is WorldVenture, working in over 65 countries. Hans writes, teaches, and practical leadership based on real-world experiences. He has written over 10 books, including an international bestseller, The Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make. Hans' new book is Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. There it is, right there. Great book. Read it, loved it, and it's just very practical. Having trained leaders in 5 continents in his career, his books have been translated into over 20 foreign languages. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Hans Finzel! Yay! And the crowd goes wild. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Pleasure to be with you today. Awesome. Fantastic. I'm excited.
Me too. I'm glad to have you here. So the top 10 ways to be a great leader. Now, based on our previous conversation, I think you'd agree, even though you are the son of a rocket scientist, leadership isn't rocket science. So the basic question is, do we need another freaking leadership book?
Exactly.
And I say that as a leadership book writer.
I know. Does the world really need another book on leadership?
Exactly.
And why would anybody want to read my book? And I would say, yes, we can always learn more stuff. It's like asking, do we need another movie at the movie theater? Yeah, we do, because we like to absorb new things. But I think what makes mine unique is 35 years of leadership wisdom today, because of self-publishing, everybody can write books, right?
Of course.
Whether it's any good or not. But I would say
that's a minor detail, whether it's any good.
But I read books, I pick them up, I'm like, this should be an article maybe, but not a book.
Mm-hmm.
But mine's chock full of wisdom, having been a leader all these years, having studied leadership. So I'd say the thing that might set it apart is real practical leadership wisdom.
Yeah, it is. It's practical. It's, some of the stuff is just like, pay attention. I mean, there's a piece I want to get into in here that I really enjoyed in the book that I actually kept going back to, that I really liked. And it's certainly not a normal reference, and I'll go to it in a minute. So it was good stuff. But I said you ran a major nonprofit for 20 years. You were the president for 20 years. What do you see as because there's going to be people watching, listening to our show who are going to go, well, I'm not in the nonprofit game.
Yes.
So what can I learn about leadership from somebody in the nonprofit? Because as you have stated very clearly, those are different worlds.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say there are some other industries that are very similar,
Mm-hmm.
and the government is not an industry, but working in the government is very much like working in the nonprofit sector, right?
Hence the deficit.
Yes, because they're never going to go out of business. They don't have to watch the bottom line. They just print more money. And so it's very much like a nonprofit. Also, the world of education. I've done quite a bit of coaching in the educational world. The average school administration, principals, again, yes, they have to be concerned about budgets, but they're not judged by the bottom line. And so it's a lot like a nonprofit. Even law enforcement is that way. I've done some work with law enforcement officers. And again, they're not driven by the bottom line. They're driven by other issues. So it's a little beyond just the nonprofit sector. Of course, the nonprofit sector is enormous when you think about things like the Red Cross, Salvation Army. I mean, it's a huge sector. But Dov, what I like to say is one of the problems in that world is terminal niceness. Because you don't have to watch the bottom line. I can't tell you how many meetings I was leading where people wanted to, what I call, gum things to death. Talk and talk and talk philosophically through things. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, if we were a business, we would go out of business. We don't have, we have to make decisions. So I find decision-making processes, for example, are so slow in the nonprofit sector, in the educational sector, in the government sector. That's just an example.
So this is interesting because it is a different world, and you talked about the places where it's similar. But at this point, and I'm just going to sort of punch this on the nose a minute, but at this point, the CEO, C-suite leader listening, watching, says, okay, well, I should stop listening because we're all about the bottom line.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I did not find that with this. I mean, I thought there was a lot of great material in here for anybody in any leadership role, not just in a nonprofit. But of course, that's where you were based. But what I want to bring to this is you've talked about the differences, which are like gumming things to death and being terminally nice. But I think that's what I said in the intro. Leadership is tough because you have to make the hard decisions. But I don't think you can get away with being nice. I'm definitely one of the first people to say nice is mean. Nice, nice guys are assholes is my line. But that I'm a little more direct because it's a way to couch the truth of what really needs to be said. But at the same time, it's not about brutality. And so there is that line, which, I found really you directed us very well at in the book, which is the line between how to be compassionate and caring and loving and all those kinds of things as a leader, and understand you're in business.
Yeah, my passion has always been to take business leadership principles and insert them into the nonprofit world.
Right.
And that's my passion. And the nonprofit world and the government world needs a whole lot more leadership style and principle and toughness. So yeah, I think 80% of the stuff in my book is definitely for CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. but there are some, there's some subtle differences. And my passion is that the nonprofit sector would listen a little more to the business leaders.
Right.
Get a little tougher. What I mean by terminal niceness is oftentimes in the nonprofit world, especially if you're dealing with volunteers who you can't fire, but just generally, I find when a person is incompetent because of all this, especially if it's a compassion-based organization like the Red Cross or Salvation Army, let's take or World Vision.
Mm-hmm.
We think we have to give people another chance and another chance and another chance. Whereas I find, you got to fire people. When I took over as a CEO, my predecessor of 23 years never fired one person. And as a result, we had an extremely dysfunctional leadership team that didn't get things done. I remember about 6 months into my tenure, I fired the first person, and it was a shot across the bow. People just stood up and said, "Oh my gosh, under Hans, we're going to be held accountable. We're going to have to actually work and show results." So that's what I mean by terminal niceness. It's deadly.
With all that, I mean, you came in, you did something vastly different. You approached nonprofit as a profit-based business. You were willing to fire, and like I said, you ran that organization for 20 years. Was there a theme? Did you notice a theme to those you had to fire?
Oh, yes. Emotional intelligence. As you know, my second, the E in leadership stands for emotional intelligence. Every person I ever fired was because of emotional, poor people skills, lack of people skills, blind spots that they couldn't get over even after I confronted them. I never fired anybody for lack of competence, for lack of IQ. It was always for lack of EQ.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because here, what I think this is one of the things that I speak about and I'm confronted about, even in my private work and coaching individuals, is people think, people have a very limited understanding of emotional intelligence. And one of those limited understandings is, I'm nice, therefore I'm emotionally intelligent. That does not make you emotionally intelligent. That actually makes you emotionally a little bit stunted, because you actually don't know how to stand up for what really matters. So,
Right.
So when people hear you say, I fired everybody based on emotional intelligence, and they say, well, you just said people were terminally nice, that sounds like they had a ton of emotional intelligence, so you fired them for the wrong reason. It's a misunderstanding, right? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example of a woman who was so competent that worked for my team. I recruited her. She was, and the most painful people to fire are the people that you hire.
Of course.
If you inherit them, it's not so hard to fire them. But if you hire them and you pour into them and you believe in them and then they don't work out, those are hard fires.
Sure.
Okay, a nice person, first of all, would just keep giving them another chance. Well, this woman was very nice, but she would, under stress, she would explode.
Right.
And she would get angry and she would embarrass people in the hall in front of other people. And people would come to me and say, Hans, I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around her,
Yeah.
And I confronted her. I said, look, you've got to learn to manage your anger. You just are brutal with people. And and finally we had to let her go. It was a painful firing, but she could not come to grips with what I was sharing with her. She couldn't grow. She couldn't face this problem of her lack of people skills.
There's one of the pieces that I speak about that I think is so missed. I think that part of the problem with becoming a leader is there's an assumed level of knowledge, and it's assumed by us as much as it is by others. So we assume that we're there, and therefore we get overwhelmed with what we've got to manage, and we stop growing. And I think that's a major problem. So very often I find that leaders get a little stunted. And I've seen them, many of them have been phenomenal learners. They've been really committed. And now they're in their third, fourth, maybe fifth year as a CEO. And they've kind of not bothered, because they're caught in the day-to-day and there's a lot to do. I understand that. But they've stopped learning. And there's an adage, I know you're familiar with it, which is, healer, heal thyself. And I always say, well, leader, lead thyself. And in order to lead thyself, leader, know thyself.
Absolutely. You know that my book, the leadership is the acrostic of the 10 chapters, and the L in leadership is exactly what we're talking about. And I think it's the most important chapter in the book, the first chapter. What does the L stand for? I always say, just hold up your hand like this. The L in leadership stands for listen and learn.
And don't be a loser.
And don't be a loser. But if you don't listen, you don't learn, and you can't learn without listening. And when I talk to people that work under very frustrated bosses, and I do a lot of that, when I speak, I ask people, how many of you work for a miserable boss? Everybody raises their hands. Sure. And when I dig down into what was it, often people will say they just don't listen. They think they know it all. They won't grow as a leader. So listening and learning is not a sign of weakness, correct?
Absolutely.
Some leaders think it's a sign of weakness to be a listener, because why would I listen? Because I know everything. I'm the boss. Well, that's
again,
just
there's that presumed knowledge, that assumed and presumed knowledge that we carry around. Why should I listen? I'm the CEO. You should listen to me.
And as a company CEO, if you don't listen to the people on the front lines that are touching the customers every day, you're going to fail eventually in your company, because you need to listen to the frontline employees, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating for me how few people actually get out in front of the people who, I give a great example. I said, I was working with a company, and I said, we're in here, I work with the founder, the CEO, I'm working with the executive board there. And I said, who would you say, if you had to pick one person, who is the number one representative of this company? If you had to only pick one person. And without doubt, they always say the founder or the CEO or, And I go, nope. And they go, well, the marketing person? Nope. Who then? Your receptionist. They go, what do you mean? The person you pay the least to is the best representation of your company. Because if I phone your company, XYZ Inc., and the person on the other phone goes, yeah, what do you want? I go, XYZ stinks.
Yeah.
I don't say Jenny the receptionist stinks. I say XYZ Inc. stinks. That's all it is. So if you don't get out and meet those people, if you don't create relationship with your frontline people, you're dead in the water.
That's right.
You've lost
Absolutely. And that's the listening, and that's the learning, and that's great leadership.
But the challenge with it, Hans, is this, is the other side of it, and I know because I've dealt with this too, is, I'll get those CEOs to go out and talk, or those founders to go out and talk to the front person, but they can't get truth. They get a sycophantic response because this guy's the founder. This guy's the CEO. He could fire my ass tomorrow, and I got to feed my kids. So I'm not going to say, oh, everything's fabulous, right? I love it. I love working here. So what would be your guidance to that leader who's confronted with a sycophantic response?
Yeah, become an undercover boss.
Buy a bad toupee and stick on a beard.
Have you ever watched Undercover Boss? That is a fantastic approach. And those guys get into the truth because nobody knows they're the boss. I don't know if there's any way you could somehow hide yourself. That would be great. Go in as a disguise. But beyond that, I would say if you could have some trusted lower level employees, and I think every CEO has people down the ranks that they are friends with. One of my best friends in my company was the building manager. He and I just hit it off because I like to tinker with stuff, and the elevator's broken and he's telling me how he's going to fix it, and I'm like, this is kind of cool. It's kind of a nice break from the stuff a CEO has to deal with. So I would ask Blake, my building manager, hey, do some research for me. Do some reconnaissance. What are people feeling? What are people saying? And they don't know that he's representing me. So that's one way to do it.
Yeah, one of the things that we've done, we actually, part of one of the sidebars of our company is we do undercover work. And that
really?
We'll go in and we'll say, because I'll say, one of my questions is, what is your culture? And they'll give me this binder, like this thing like this. Oh, this is our culture. And I go, no, that's a folder. And they go, no, but it's got all the things of our HR policies. And go, that's
our corporate values.
Corporate values and our mission statements up there on the wall, and nobody's ever read it. Nobody knows what the hell it says. And I say, that's not your culture. And they go, it is. And I go, no, it's not. I guarantee you what you think is your culture and what it actually is vastly different. There's a subculture. And you can't find it out because you have a label that is called boss in some form. Even if it's manager, it's still boss. That's the problem. You need an undercover agent. And they go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. That's one of the things we do. We go in and we find that out, and then we bring it back, and then that's how we deal with the company. Because, now here's the real problem. You brought us in to do purpose work. We're happy to do that, help you find your purpose. But you can't find your purpose if you're not addressing the real problem.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. It's kind of like the secret shopper idea
yeah.
for restaurants and grocery stores. Yeah.
But I find that so much of leadership is guesswork in the way that it's done. I think this is the best way for us. And sometimes I think it's the best way because Google are doing it and they're having success. Well, you're not Google. You can't afford Google things. So what are you going to do? And you just said it. Listen. Get out there, listen. And part of that is, of course, the secret shopper idea, the boss undercover. But the simplicity of it is relationships. And I know one of the places that you and I talked a lot about in our previous conversation, and you've covered it great in here, is the power of vulnerability. Let's talk a little bit about that in how that becomes a catalyst for real powerful listening and to really get the goods.
Yeah, and a lot of leaders think exactly opposite on vulnerability. They think if I show my weakness, if I show my struggle, then people will not respect me. But it's actually the opposite.
Absolutely.
Illustration, I heard recently a friend of mine, CEO, and he's very vulnerable. And what vulnerability is just I'm honest and open with who I really am. I'm not pretending to be perfect. And so this friend of mine who's very vulnerable as a leader, one of his managers came up and says, aren't you embarrassed to be so vulnerable? Aren't you afraid people aren't going to respect you? And he said, well, what about you? Do you respect me? And she said to him, I respect you more than anybody I've ever worked for. There you go.
Right.
So vulnerability is just being open and honest and not being a pretender that I've got my act together. Vulnerability is being open. And it's a powerful force. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. And, of course, she's written many books and she's become famous just on the power of vulnerability. And she's on to something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I covered it extensively in my book, The Power of Vulnerability. It's the most powerful thing of all. But do you think it's generational, Hans? You and I are in a different generation. And in our generation, I find there's and older, there's a very strong bias against it. I mean, you and I can show up with Brene Brown, we can show up with the statistics, and we can show up with the research. And it's still, I ain't doing that stuff.
It's totally generational. The World War II generation were the last ones still around, the George Bush senior kind of leaders, it's suck it up.
Yeah.
And lead by, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and suck it up and don't. That's the way my father was. I grew up in a pure German home, and boy, you do not show weakness.
No.
But as generations have gone down, the millennials, who I'm real high on the millennial, and I'm working on a new book with a millennial. And I'm learning that millennials demand vulnerability
Absolutely.
and accessibility. They do not want their leader in a corner office secluded somewhere. They want to be not only working shoulder to shoulder with them, but they want vulnerability. They will respect a leader who's vulnerable.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you can't get away with it anymore. And I love that.
You can't.
I've said that's one of the things I love about millennials is, as you said, they demand vulnerability, but it's not, they don't at all disrespect you for it. They actually see you as real. In my book, one of the first things in the opening of the book, I said my last book, Fiercely Loyal, one of the first things I talked about was there's a crisis in leadership, and it is that those who are coming up don't trust leaders.
That's right.
It's that simple.
And a lot of companies are not attracting millennial workers, and they desperately need to. And I will tell them, I said, you've got this secluded executive floor where your people. There's this company that I ran into in Texas where you walk into the lobby and there's a spiral staircase that goes up to the executive floor where they all work. They have their own restaurant, their own gym, and there's a little chain across this spiral staircase. Do not enter.
Yeah.
What signal is that sending? I'll tell you, a millennial will not work at that place.
No.
Nobody gets to go up there and meet those guys unless they're real special.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me. See, I want to hear this from you, Hans, because what's fascinating to me is the argument that comes, which is, hey, we made 200 million last year. Don't tell us what to do. Obviously, what we're doing works.
Yeah, that's a sad argument. I've been watching the drug industry in America that is providing all the OxyContin. We have a massive drug epidemic in our country that is being fueled by these massively successful drug companies, and the government can't shut them down. Their lawyers are so strong, and so it's a moral argument to me.
Yeah.
Just because they're making so much money and they're yeah, sure, it's easy to sell OxyContin to unscrupulous pharmacists and doctors. Absolutely. There's an unending demand. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. So this is where you get into morality somewhat, and you say, just because you're making money doesn't mean you're a great leader and that your company is truly successful. It gets to, how do you define being a successful company?
Right. So now we're back at where we started, which is this, where I think people misunderstand, is because it's not about being nice, but it is about having a good moral compass. Right? So it's not about being nice as in, let's give everybody 10,000 chances, have no freaking boundaries about anything, or I have boundaries, but they're around a set of principles that I live by and that I run this company by and that we are all embodied into. And I think that this is where so much gets lost, is because it's like, for me, and it's one of the reasons I say that nice people are assholes, is because they don't have that moral compass. And so they go along with everybody and everything, and they do exactly what that lady did that you explained. They eventually blow up. It's a lack of boundaries. But that moral compass becomes those boundaries that allows you to say, this is not appropriate. Even if we made 150 million last year, but I can't sleep at night.
Yes.
That's not a great recipe. And what's more is, even if it's a good recipe for your shareholders, it's a terrible recipe for future business, because not only are you looking to employ millennials, but they are going to be, even if they're not now, they are going to be your buyers. And coming up behind them are Gen Z, who are already 17 years old. And they're going to be part of the workforce in 5 years minimum. So now you've got another problem, because their moral compass is going to be even stronger around ecology and caring about the planet and caring about people and weather. And so it's like, give your head a shake.
Hey, let me give you another aspect of terminal niceness, since that's kind of our theme. Another problem with a terminally nice leader is they don't confront.
Absolutely.
They don't care enough to confront.
Stop. That was good.
Okay.
Say that again, because I want everybody to hear that. They don't care enough to confront. Talk to us, just hit that, because that's beautiful.
One of the biggest problems of a terminally nice leader is they don't care enough to confront. They are conflict avoiders. And it's the worst possible practice of a leader is to avoid conflict and hope it'll go away. Does it go away? Never. It gets worse.
It gets worse.
So you have to care enough to confront. I am naturally a conflict avoider. I figured out why. I grew up in a home I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. My mother was a raging alcoholic. And so I learned to be very independent and to avoid conflict because it was so painful. And I've had to turn around and teach myself, as much as it's painful, I have to go into the danger zone To me, confronting a person who is doing something inappropriate, and it's much easier for a leader, by the way, to confront a person who is not meeting their benchmarks than it is to confront a leader who is practicing inappropriate behavior, right?
Absolutely.
No, and that's this woman. It wasn't that she wasn't producing her benchmark. She was doing a fabulous job, but what she was doing with other people was inappropriate. But those are the hardest conversations to have. I need to sit down and talk to you about how you're coming across to people, because that gets down to the core of our being, right? And those are the most painful discussions. But that's the responsibility of a leader, is to go into the danger zone and care enough to confront.
But that's the thing that I think that most people struggle with. Again, it's that thing around being nice, but if I confront, I don't care. And I put it to my clients, if you don't confront, you don't care.
That's exactly right.
And that's why I said I wanted you to hit that, because that to me is so often, I've seen this. My original training was as a therapist, and I would watch couples, and they're like, and they'd say, well, we haven't had an argument in 20 years. And I go, oh my God, I guess you're getting divorced. Because it's like, that's the clue. You don't care enough to confront. If I upset my wife, she cares enough to me to say, hey, this was out of order. My wife and I have an agreement that divorce is always an option. And people go, that's terrible. I go, no, it's fantastic. Why? Because it means I can't get away with mistreating her. She can't get away with mistreating me. It's always an option for the other person, which brings my behavior to I want to love this person. I want to treat them with respect because they're willing to confront me. Because I don't want to be that guy. There was a research done in the late 90s that 60% of men whose wives asked for a divorce were shocked. Like, you're shocked? Did you get any clues? Because if you've ever met a woman, I'm sure you got clues. I'm just certain of it.
Yeah.
They're shocked. Why? Because they're oblivious.
Clueless.
Because nobody bothered to care enough to confront.
That's right.
And so I think that is such a powerful point, Hans.
It's exactly. And it's a huge problem in the leadership realm. And the higher you go in a company, apparently, the harder it is to confront. Patrick Lencioni, who's done a lot of work in this area, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, he says that average corporate CEOs don't want to confront people.
No.
I'm too busy watching the bottom line, dealing with my board, my stock. I really don't have time to go talk to Fred about his inappropriate behavior.
And they're perpetuating something that's incredibly destructive. It is fascinating. So what would you say to that leader who's feeling that? Let's go to them. So we've got these leaders now, whether they're profit or non-profit, whether they're CEOs or whatever, managers even, and they're and people don't know this about me, and probably wouldn't guess it about you. The confrontation is not natural to me. It's very uncomfortable. I don't like it. I'm willing to do it because I care. But what would you say to that leader who was going, yeah, but that's just not who I am. It's okay for you and Hans. You guys are these leadership guys, and you can do that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'm just not touchy-feely.
I'm not a touchy-feely guy. I'm a bottom line guy.
It's not in my wheelhouse. I would say your team will not respect you if you don't do that dirty work of confrontation. I had a CFO I had to fire. And he was the hardest fire I ever did, and I kept putting it off, and my board told me I should let him go, but I just kept giving him another chance. I don't know, it was crazy, because I guess I was being terminally nice. But you know what finally did it to me? I realized I was losing the respect of all my team, because they all saw this problem that I was not courageous enough to deal with.
Yeah.
And when I finally dealt with it, guess what? My respect level went up. Hans finally did what we all knew he needed to do a year ago. So I'll tell you, you CEOs who are avoiding conflict and avoiding that danger zone, you are losing respect from your people because they see what's going on, and they see that this is part of your job that you need to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very important and powerful point. I think that oftentimes the thing we fear and I've said this a lot to people, is the thing you fear is the thing you're already manifesting. So do the behavior that's the other way. So you fear that if you fire this person you took on, you're going to lose respect of the rest of the people because you're the one who hired them, and you're going to look stupid if you fire the person because you believed in them and you went to bat for them.
Yeah.
No, you're actually manifesting a lack of respect because you didn't get rid of somebody who is inappropriate for the company.
That's right. And why are people afraid to go in there to that office and confront? I think a lot of people feel, well, I'm going to feel uncomfortable having this conversation. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. And my message to you is, hey, get over it. It's part of leadership. Here's something else, Dove, you probably see, I see all the time, where the hard conversations don't take place until the day the person's fired. And then that person says, what? I didn't see this coming.
Exactly.
And it's true. It was totally unfair to that person that they were not given these conversations along the way and given a chance.
Yeah.
Until it's all completely broken, and then they go in there and they fire this person. I call it the great ambush.
Exactly.
Suddenly just boom.
Yeah, the rug's pulled out. I mean, I was never a fan of Jack Welch and his leadership style at all when he was at GM and at GE and all that stuff. It just seemed like cutting away the bottom 20%, and it was just mean and hard and bottom line. And it's fascinating. I saw Jack Welch speak at the World Business Conference in New York about 5 years ago, and he completely shifted. And he talked about the generosity gene. And one of the things he said is, nobody should ever be fired and surprised.
Amen.
He said, if you're going to fire somebody, they should know it's coming because you confronted them and you said to them, what's going on? What coaching do you need? What guidance do you need? What training do you need?
Absolutely, yes.
And then if they don't come up to that, and you've given them a time frame and work with them on that, then they go, yeah, I kind of knew it was coming, because there's no surprise. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's that generosity gene, the willingness to, but that's again, caring enough to confront.
That's right. Caring enough to confront.
That's a good book. We should write that together. Care enough to confront.
Yeah.
How to kick people in the ass and own your own reputation, and to lovingly kick people in the ass and own your own reputation.
There you go. That'd be great.
One of the things you spoke about in here, as I talked, we spoke about vulnerability before, and I want to come back to that because you referenced Matthew. Now, I am not a Christian, and I don't pretend to be one, but I did study religious studies. I did study the Bible extensively, and I loved your example of Matthew when it talked about vulnerability and leadership. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know we have, despite the fact that I swear on the show and despite the fact that I'm very open about not being a particularly religious person, I am a very spiritual person, and I have studied many religions, but I did love the way you refer to Matthew under vulnerability, and how important, how well he stepped up into that position around vulnerability and stating how he felt about being a leader.
All right, I got to find it here.
Did I put it on the spot?
It's so funny that people always think if you've written a book, you've memorized everything.
Oh, no.
Page, right?
You don't even need to go into the exact quote. It's not about that. But I just love the fact that you referenced Matthew when you talked about, actually have it on a board right here, where you said, I am the least of the apostles.
Oh, yeah, this is about Paul. Yeah, the Apostle Paul. Yeah. Okay, now I know which reference you're talking about. Because people that know the New Testament know that Paul was the most famous apostle. Mm-hmm. He was the one that took the good news and spread it, and he was the biggest missionary, the biggest church planter. But he came from a position of tremendous brokenness. My last chapter is about the power of humility. He was so humble that he said, I'm the least of all. Right. He said, I don't even know why I have the position that I do, because I'm the least of all the apostles. So that's a great attitude to have. That's the power of vulnerability. It's the opposite of arrogance.
Yeah, and I think that it's different than our understanding of being falsely humble. I see a lot of false humble, but it's just understanding that I'm in this position, whatever the position is, by grace. I'm here by, I may have done all kinds of right things to get here, but it's always tenuous. And it requires me to show up every day and to lose my arrogance. And one of the things I've said about it, I know I fell off a mountain. I really understand arrogance very well. It's very easy to have what I call creeping arrogance. I've met some incredibly humble people who have developed creeping arrogance. They didn't know they had it. It was creeping. And
when you say you fell off a mountain, is that literal or figurative?
Oh, it's both. It's literal and figurative. So I fell off a mountain in 1990. I fell 120 feet, 12 stories, and got smashed to pieces. And what I like to say now is, many years later, not at the time, is that I fell 120 feet off a self-imposed pedestal and landed on my ego.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. That's great. And I'm glad you brought that up because I've had some crushing defeats in my leadership journey. I've had rebellion. I've had people betray me. I tell in the book about a team that ejected me, voted me off the island. And actually, those were the best experiences of my leadership journey to make me humble. And I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins, The Good to Great story.
Me too.
And in his, I love his conclusion that one of the great characteristics of great leaders is they're level 5 leaders. And a level 5 leader is a humble leader.
Right.
They have strong personal resolve bathed in tremendous humility.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the really great corporate leaders in America today, no matter what their age, I think you'll see that humility gene. And I bet if you trace back in their story, you'd find reasons why they're not full of themselves. They've probably been broken. They've probably fallen off a few mountains.
Right. So when you think about that, do you see the distinction in yourself between what I call BF and AF, before fall, after fall?
Oh, yes. I was so full of myself before the fall when I was in my 30s. I thought I was God's gift to the world. And I talk about it in the last chapter where my team finally got up and basically I was in kind of a situation where the leadership was voted in and I was voted out. And I just was crushed. And I said, why? I went back to him and said, what? He said, Hans, you are so gifted and talented. There's not anything you don't do well. But you know what? You don't care about us. It's all about you and your agenda and your career and your success. And you know what? They were absolutely right.
Sure.
And so that's...
But they cared enough to confront you on that. And as a result, it transformed your leadership.
Yes, but it didn't permanently transform my leadership because through the years I like your face. I've never heard that before. Creeping
arrogance.
I had that problem as I got into my 50s, 20 years later, and I'm a CEO, big shot, making all this money, having all these perks. The creeping arrogance came back. And that's when I was betrayed by someone. And again, it's funny how there again, I had to fall off another mountain to have a gut check and to realize it's not about me, it's about we.
Yeah.
That's one of my mantras. It's not about me, it's about we. And I do what I do so you can be successful at doing what you do. If you work in my company, my role is to help you be successful. That's the conversion I finally went through.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. I did a whole piece on what are called pivotal moments and choice points. Pivotal choice points and pivotal points. And those are different points. And people say to me, it must have changed your life falling off the mountain. And I go, it didn't. It did initially. It did for a short period of time. And then once I looked normal again, after however many reconstructive surgeries, my arrogance was right back. And I tell the story of how, people, my jaw was wired closed and people say, how you doing? I'm great. I'm coming back. Right? And it was arrogant. And I had to fall into that dark place and feel the pain for me to actually come back. And not to come back, but to shift, to change direction. So the fall itself is not the changing point. That's the pivotal moment. But the choice point is where you actually can go back and do the same old crap, but you choose to do something else. And for me, I tell people all the time, the stories are about my fall. But what people don't realize is that was my 4th mountain climbing fall. Not my first, my 4th. And, because some of us are a bit thick, and some of us need the universe to just give us a good one in the side of the head. But it's that moment where you have to check with yourself about, as you said, I understand all human beings have a need for significance. We all need to feel important. I get that. We need to feel that we matter. I get that. But if that drives everything, that's when you're dead in the water. And as you said, it has to go from me to we. Flip the M upside down, me to we. That is what shifts it. Was there a moment in that process, and this is important, I think, for our leaders, was there a moment in any of that where you felt like you wanted to quit?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about that and how you came back from that.
Well, actually, after that crisis as a young man in my 30s, I did take a sabbatical. I actually went and got my doctorate in the field of leadership because I thought not only had I screwed up as a leader, I was also working for a miserable boss. And here I was a failure, but my boss was a failure. So I went back and studied leadership and learned a lot in those 2 years doctoral studies. But then I went back, and by the way, I didn't. I could have just not gone back to that organization, but I decided to go back and confront that, to work with that leader, and I'm glad I did. It's a tough thing to know when to leave, and on my podcast and on my YouTube channel, I had somebody write me the other day, and I do a lot of talking about micromanaging, and they were talking about their terrible micromanaging boss that they don't respect, and I said, if you've lost respect for the leadership, you just should go find another job. Yeah. If the glass is broken, you can't put it back together. So in that case, as a young man, I didn't quit. I confronted that. I went back, and I'm glad I did. Sometimes we need to just power through. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that was my experience. Now, I will tell you later in my career, in my 50s, when I was betrayed by someone, and that was a real crisis. And I talk about that in my book also, that in that case, I realized, this is a whole nother topic, Dove, but I lost my passion for the job.
Once you'd been betrayed.
Yeah, well, the betrayal, I lost my passion after I'd been betrayed, but I think hidden in that betrayal was some truth.
Yes.
Because the man who betrayed me, he was trying to undermine me secretly with my board of directors. He wanted my job, was the bottom line, and that happens a lot. But I remember one day he came into my office and he said, "Hans, we need a leader who's all in or all gone." Wow, that's a gutsy statement. But you know what? I was drifting away. After 20 years, I should have quit and retired and gone on to something else, because we are very different when we're 40 years old than when we're 60 years old. And the things that really jive us when we're 35 or 40 can bore us when we're 55 or 60. Mm-hmm. And I realize that, and it's a whole nother topic, but when is it time to leave? And America has a lot of people stuck in leadership where they should be leaving and making room for the younger generations. But there are so many wrong reasons to hold on to a job. I talk about all the P's, the power, the prestige, the position, the perks, the paycheck, right? And people hang on to jobs for the wrong reasons. I was so passionate in my 40s. But anyway, long story short,
that's a great piece in and of itself, because I think that, I speak a lot about passion versus purpose, and they're not the same thing. And what I say is that passion can change. If you want to know people think your passion should be your career. If that's the case, every man who is a straight man should have gone into gynecology. Because at 15, that was your passion. 16, 18, that was your passion. Passion changes. But the purpose doesn't. And so sometimes the passion fuel has run out and it needs another place. And today we're seeing a growing number of leaders who are sticking around, not to 60 or 65, but 70 and 75. And for God's sake, move on. Yes. Move on, make room. The limit of your organization is you. And I'm working with a company right now, and the founder is in his mid-70s. He's slowed down, but he's not letting go of the reins, and he's actually in the freaking way. And it's like, but it's the identity. And, you know, in the work that we do around the psychology of all this with our clients, is like, for many people, they don't have another identity. When you reach out to shake their hand, they say, "Hi, I'm Fred. I'm the founder of.
Yes.
I'm the CEO."
That's right.
And
what's the second question every man asks another man after what's your name? What do you do?
Right, and there's the identity crisis.
Yeah,
so if I'm no longer Fred Bloggs, the founder of ABC Inc., who the heck am I? I can't face that, so I'm going to die in the role. And that's unfortunate, because you could bring so much more to the world at that next level, what you're talking about. At the next level, if you let go of that identity, you can pick up another one. And if you go, I just don't want to change, you don't have to. Bring your expertise to the world, but just take it away from the restriction of the form that it's in.
That's exactly my story. That's what happened to me when I turned 60. And even though I was painfully betrayed, it was a blessing in disguise, because I was so stuck in my identity that I was the CEO of this thing. And Stephen Jobs really spoke to me at that time. You know, his famous speech that he did, the commencement address, where he said, "Don't settle. You know, do what you love what you do. And if you haven't found it, keep looking for it." And I realized I wasn't doing what I loved anymore, and I wasn't loving what I was doing anymore. And so I made that painful, scary decision. I call it jumping off the high diving board. And I wasn't sure there was any water down in the swimming pool. Could have been concrete, but because I decided not to look for another job, but to go out on my own. Very risky.
Right.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, and it had tremendous payoff. I've never been happier. I'm doing what I love. I love what I do, but it took a crisis to get my butt out of that job.
Hans, this has been a great conversation, but you know, there's something I want here. I want you to guide our leaders. I always ask my guests to give our leaders something practical that you would love them to do in the next, ideally 24 hours, but let's say the next 5 working days, that they would do to integrate what it is you've shared. The one thing you'd like them to really get and put in action.
I'd like them to really understand emotional intelligence. And I have on my website, hansfinzel.com, I've got a couple of podcasts on emotional intelligence. I would say go listen to those 2 podcasts, EQ Part 1, EQ Part 2, especially if you've never heard of the topic. But even if you have, I think you'll find some tremendous insight. It's an area every leader needs to grow in and understand and learn. So go listen to a couple of my podcasts on emotional intelligence.
Beautiful. Listen, my friend, it was an honor and a pleasure to share this time with you. I really want to thank you for everything that you shared. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
I did too, Dove. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and you're inspiring to be with, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. And listen, I say this to you every time, listeners, viewers, don't just listen to this. Please, don't just listen. I know podcasts play in the background, but take the time to listen. Take some notes. Pay attention. Listen back. I promise you will always hear more the second time than you did the first.
That's
right. This was a great show. Hans was a great guest. Get yourself over to his website, www.hansfinzel.com. Go over there. He's got tons of resources. Like I said, there's the podcast there. There's other resources. Check out his book. Get over to Amazon. Read the book. And then go on Amazon again and write a review for it. You know, let other people know how great it is. I loved it. I know you will too. Get yourself over there. I want to thank Hans for being on here today. It was fabulous having you here, sir. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, dear listener, for being part of the show. And remember that the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, but only to have them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're really sick or tired of investing in training and developing your talent, only to have them leave you before you get that ROI, then reach out to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into your purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Matrix like the movie, you don't need the triple W. Matrix.fullmontyleadership.com and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool valued at $197. You get it absolutely free for being a regular listener. Again, I'm your host, Dov Barron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, profit in your business, your life, and your leadership. Stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can step up and be an even better leader by caring enough to confront. Till next time, this is Dov Barron, and I am out.